And I want to point something out that James says there, and then we're going to go back to the book of Job. So James chapter 5 is the only time that the New Testament brings up Job by name in all of the New Testament. And to frame what we're looking at, have you ever had a time where you were going through something really difficult and then somebody had to one-up your suffering? You know, like that one time when we had that gospel meeting and that speaker was really bad. Well, there was this one time that it was 85 degrees and I got a worse story to tell you about something. How helpful is it when somebody one-ups your suffering? You always feel really encouraged and comforted by that? Not at all. If we were in the same room with Job, though, I do think that it would make us all be quiet about our sufferings and our trials. Look at James chapter 5, verses 10 and 11. As an example of suffering and patience, brothers, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Behold, we consider those blessed who remain steadfast. You have heard the steadfastness of Job, and you have seen the purpose of the Lord, how the Lord is compassionate and merciful. James tells us at the end of this letter that you need to go back and study the Old Testament prophets. Go back and look at the life of Hosea. Go back and look at the life of Jeremiah as an example of steadfastness and patience in suffering. Think about the idea of steadfastness. I don't know what everybody's version says. Maybe your version might say patience or steadfastness, something like that. But the mental image that I get of steadfastness is the Greek god Atlas holding up the earth. And I don't know if that's where the phrase "don't drop the ball" comes from. But if he drops the ball, we're all dead. Of course, he's not a real god anyways. But the idea of being steadfast means that I can bear up under pressure. I can go through difficulties, and I don't justify sin while it's happening. How easy is it to justify sin when things are not good? That's when I lash out. That's when I go look up things online that I shouldn't look up. That's when I speak in ways that are evil. These are the excuses people give for when they're going through something difficult. And James says that when you're going through something difficult, don't neglect prayer. He says that later in the chapter. But he says here, let me say it this way, when you're going through something difficult, never neglect deep Bible study. Go back to books that are neglected. Go back to books that are ignored, like Job. Why say this to the audience of James? This audience was scattered from their homeland. Some of these people had health problems, it seems, from chapter 5, depending on how you view that text. There was even people in chapter 4 in the same church fighting with one another. What I want us to do is go back to the book of Job and see how we can consider his example of steadfastness. Go back to Job chapter 1. Now, throughout the first 2 chapters of the book of Job, the book keeps going between things that are happening on earth and things that are happening in the heavenly realm. And the first 5 verses give you the earthly description of Job, that he was from the land of Uz, that he probably lived sometime before the call of Abraham. You look at the length of Job's life at the end of the book, and it seems like this was still the time, perhaps right after the flood, right before the flood. There's debates about when all of this was. But we see that his character in the first 5 verses is that he fears God and he turns away from evil. This guy is a righteous man. And it's not just that he's got good character, he's extraordinarily blessed physically. 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 7 sons, 3 daughters, making a total of 10. That's one of the numbers of completion in the Bible. That's his description on earth. But when you get to around verse 6, you start to see some things happening in the heavenly realm. Look at Job chapter 1, verses 6 through 11. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. The Lord said to Satan, "From where have you come?" Satan answered the Lord and said, from going to and fro on the earth, from walking up and down on it. And the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil? Then Satan answered the Lord and said, does Job fear God for no reason? Have you not put a hedge around him on his house and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face. This scene here is like God is the head of this cosmic council. Like the way that an earthly king almost would have like a big table with a bunch of people around him. You've got God here, and then Satan comes, and God asks this question to Satan, and he initiates the conversation. From where have you gone? Well, the devil went down to Georgia, and he checked out things there, and he went here, there, and yonder. And as he went down, that's a song. And as he went to all these places, God then says, he brings up one person. And he says, in all the places that you went, did you consider my servant Job? That there's none like him. That this man is blameless and upright. So God is agreeing with how Job is described in the first few verses. Now time out for a second. In the heavenly realm, do you want God ever to initiate a conversation about you to Satan? Have you ever thought about the Hammond Church of Christ? Have you ever thought about fill in your name? That this person is an upright person, and Satan doesn't disagree that, yeah, Job is an upright person, but his interpretation on why he is the difference. The only reason, God, that he serves you is you give him goodies. You're like a cosmic gumball machine to him. You keep giving things to him, and of course, he's going to continually be happy with you, and so the only reason he serves you is because of all the things he gets from you. Ask yourself this question. If all the earthly blessings you had were stripped from you, would you still serve God? Would you still serve God for nothing in the way that the world would look at you? If everything that you had put your hope in on earth was stripped away, would you find reason to say, you know what? I'm going to curse God. This language of cursing God gets brought up a couple times in this book. What does it mean to curse God? To denounce him, to say, I'm done with you, I don't want anything to do with you anymore. Look at verse 12. Job chapter 1, verse 12. And the Lord said to Satan, behold, all that he has is in your hand. Only against him do not stretch out your hand. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. All right, so game on. Satan says, if I just can mess everything up in his life, he's going to curse you. And God says, okay, do it. See what happens. Do you wonder if in your suffering and your trials, if there's a curtain that you don't know what's going on behind it, but this book starts to give us some indication that there are spiritual beings rooting for us and rooting for our demise, and the way that we're going to act in those circumstances is going to prove something to the spiritual realm. That's what this book is showing us. Now, before we start looking at some of the things that gets messed up in Job's life, I just want to say how much I appreciate how the first 5 verses begin and how God agrees with the first 5 verses that Job is a blameless and upright man. How often in your life have you had something bad happen and your first instinct is to try to figure out what you did wrong to make it happen? Is that sometimes the case, by the way? Does the book of Proverbs sometimes say that there's actions and then there's consequences, and you can trace your suffering to something bad that you did? Yeah, that's sometimes the case. But then the book of Job comes along and says, but that's not always the case. Like what's happening with this guy. Look, now, there's 4 things that get disrupted in the life of Job. All of them, for memorization's sake, I think can accurately begin with the letter F. The first one are his finances. Look at Job chapter 1, starting in verse 13. Now there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. Now we're going to come back to the siblings in a little bit, the children. Look at verse 14 though. And there came a messenger to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them, and the Sabeans fell upon them and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, the fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 groups and made a raid on the camels and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. What a bad day. If you're a farmer today or 5,000 years ago, your wealth is bound up in your animals. When you shear the sheep, you go sell the wool and make money. Every day, you milk the cows and you sell the milk for money. And he finds out in one moment that his 401k has been liquidated. Everything that he has wealth-wise is just gone. There was an act of God, this fire that fell down from heaven, and 2 groups of people that came and raided different groups. And Satan allows, so far, 3 messengers to escape it, with this terrible news to bring to Job. Do you remember when the 2008 stock market crash happened? And there were people who lived on Wall Street that literally hung themselves in their apartments because everything was destroyed for them in their world. So when I lived in California, there was a family that I liked to describe as a whack-a-mole family. Have you ever gone to one of those carnivals and played whack-a-mole? It's a really cleverly named game, because what you do is you take this mallet and whack a mole, and then another one comes up, and then you have to get that one, and then another one. You see how it goes? That's why it's named that, if you didn't know that. And this family would have like one problem surface, and then they would try to take care of that one. And then another problem would surface, and then they'd have to take care of that one. And you couldn't always trace it back to bad decisions that they made. So we were getting together for a Bible study, and I asked Roy, and I said, Roy, what's going on in your life today? And he said, well, our debit card information was stolen, and all of our money was drained yesterday. Okay. If all the wealth that you had was taken away, would you curse God and die? Would you say, well, you know, I expected more out of my service to God, and so I don't know that I like God if this is the thing that's going to happen in my life. That's the first thing that gets disrupted in his life are his finances. But look at verses 18 and 19, and we see his family. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And behold, a great wind, maybe like a tornado, came across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell upon the young people, and they are dead. And I alone have escaped to tell you. Somebody at this point in Job's life, you know, before this 4th messenger comes, might say, Job, I know that you've lost all your wealth, all your finances, but at least you still have your family. Actually, here comes the 4th messenger. In one moment, he finds out that all of his 10 children are dead. Did you notice, though, that the text doesn't say that his children died? Have you ever noticed this? Now, did the children die? Just so I'm clear, all the children died. But that's not what the text says. Have you ever had a time before where you had to break news to somebody and you had to say it in a veiled way because the news is too horrible to just say? So here comes this 4th messenger, and he says, all your children were together. And this tornado or something comes along, and the young people are dead. That's how he says it. When Samantha and I first got married, 10 days later, we moved to Nashville, Tennessee, and I'm training to preach at a church there. And there's a guy at the church who's 36 years old, and he has AIDS. Now, with the only information that you have so far about this story, what are you already assuming perhaps about this guy? Sexual sin, something like that? Nope, because not all suffering is always because you did something wrong. This kid was born with hemophilia. And at age 8, he had a blood transfusion, and the blood donor had AIDS. So through no fault of his own, the rest of his life is going to be suffering. When we move to Nashville, he's 36 years old, and he finally passes away. And the father starts meeting with me, and not once does he shake his fist at God and say, if this is what God's going to bring into my life, I'm done with him. If something tragic happened to your children, would you find to be a reason in that would make you stop serving God? Now, it's the family is not just the children. Skip over for a moment to chapter 2, and we'll see more of the context of this in just a moment. But look at Job chapter 2, verses 9 and 10. Then his wife said to him, do you still hold fast your integrity? Curse God and die. But he said to her, you speak as one of the foolish women would speak. Shall we receive good from God, and shall we not receive evil? In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. Do you remember back in Job chapter 1, verse 11, when Satan is talking to God and he says, let me disrupt his life and he will curse you to your face? That's what he said back in 1:11. And now, what is Mrs. Job saying to Job? She's become the mouthpiece of Satan. Job, curse God. Do it. Do it. Now, I used to have a really, really negative view of Mrs. Job. And I've upgraded that to just a really negative view of Mrs. Job. I still have a negative view of her, don't worry. But try to think through what she's going through. Do you think that she's suffering? She's lost all 10 of her children. All the wealth that she had with her husband is also gone. Can you imagine that in her mind she might be thinking something like, what else might happen? How about euthanasia? How about a mercy killing? Curse God and a lightning bolt will just hit you, you'll be done, and all the suffering will be gone. It'll be like a mercy killing, Job. Can you see it perhaps from that perspective? It's misguided compassion, I think is what's happening here. I remember when I was a new Christian, when I was 19 years old, and I would hear older preachers talk about getting married. And they'd always say this, you want to find a spouse that's going to help you get to heaven. You want to find a spouse that's going to help you get to heaven. What if you had a spouse that wasn't supportive of wholehearted service to God? And maybe their compassion on you, maybe their approach to you it wasn't all bad, it was misguided, but they weren't really wholly supportive of you serving the Lord. Would you, over enough time, let that wear away your service to the Lord if you were married to somebody who was not on board with this? That's the second thing that begins with the letter F. The first was finances, the second one was family. The third one, though, is his flesh. Go back a few verses in Job chapter 2, verse 4. Then Satan answered the Lord and said, skin for skin, all that a man has he will give for his life. But stretch out your hand and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse you to your face. And the Lord said to Satan, behold, he is in your hand, only spare his life. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and struck Job with loathsome sores from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And he took a piece of broken pottery with which to scrape himself while he sat in the ashes. Job, I know you lost your finances, but at least you have your family. Actually, no. At least you still have your health, though. Nope, you don't have that now either. Do you notice what Satan's theory is here? All right, God, this is round 2. I messed up everything around Job, but if you let me mess up his health, his flesh, then people will start to lose their mind when it comes to their own personal health. Do you think Satan knows by experience that he can make a lot of bad things happen in your life? But there's something unique about letting your health get affected. And of all the things that Job could have had done to his body, like Satan has free range. Could have been cancer. It could have been a myriad of things. And he decides to do boils. How bad did those things have to be if he's got free range? Since I become a Christian, bookstores have been closing, I guess. but I used to go to bookstores a lot and look at do you see the quotes, Christian section of the bookstores? And I would try to see what kind of books were in those sections. And you know that every year and a half, 2.5 years, there's kind of like a trend of books that get written, and then those trend of books kind of get worn out, and then people write a new trend of books. Back around I guess it was 2013, 14, 15 or something, there was a series of books that various authors wrote about health and the Bible. So there was the Daniel fast. And if you eat like Daniel, you'll be healthy. And then there was Body Built by God. And if you do these things that the Bible teaches, you'll have a healthy body. By the way, if you're interested in making a quick $1 million, here's a good idea. The John the Baptist diet book. Locusts and wild honey. And I bet if somebody wrote it, there would be people D-U-M-B enough to go and buy it, thinking that there was some kind of secret code in there. And then you got Job, who's a righteous man, and his health gets turned inside out. If something happened to your health, would you use it as an excuse to stop serving God? If something were to threaten your health, would you use that as an excuse to stop serving God? Notice the last thing that begins with the letter F. Look at Job chapter 2, verse 11. Now when Job's 3 friends heard of all this evil that had come upon him, they came each from his own place. Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. And they made an appointment together to come to show him sympathy and comfort him. Now, I have to think, like how I had a really, really negative view of Mrs. Job, and then it got just negative. I had a really, really negative view of the friends, and now it's just really negative. So, how many of you really like visiting sick people in the hospital? Anybody just get a kick out of that? This is so much fun doing that? No, you don't like doing that. It's an act of love. And in a day where lightning came from heaven and a tornado came and people have raided Job, do you want to get in the blast radius of Job right now? I mean, people talk about how if somebody's speaking highly of himself, that they say, I don't want to stand too close to you, otherwise the lightning bolt's going to hit me too. What kind of friend do you have to be to get this close to Job in this context? I think you got to be a real good friend to do that. So these 3 friends come initially to sympathize and comfort him. And they made the mistake of opening up their mouth. Because they start looking at Job and they believe that this is how the world works. The only reason anything bad would ever happen to you is because you did something bad. So Job, open up, tell us, confess, confess, confess. And he keeps holding fast his integrity, saying, I didn't do anything that's connected to this suffering in my life. Get off my back. Do you think Job's friends are alive and well today? You ever had something happen in your life? And people just kept coming into your life, invading you, and trying to figure out something that you did. Job's friends have not died. What would you do if your friends let you down? So when I first became a Christian, I mentioned on Sunday morning that my parents were printing out articles from atheist websites telling me why I shouldn't trust in the Bible or read the Bible. One of the things that my mom and dad did is they got in contact with my best friend. And they told my best friend that I've joined a cult and that he shouldn't talk with me anymore. And so after that day, Brian just stopped talking with me. And I talked to my mom and dad and I said, do you guys happen to know what's going on with Brian? Because he won't talk to me anymore. And my mom said, yeah, I know exactly what happened. I told him you joined a cult and to stop talking to you. Have you ever had a friend stab you in the back? It's hard enough when it's a non-Christian friend. You know what's even more difficult? Is when it's brothers and sisters in Christ. How many people have you seen walk away from the Lord because of Christian hypocrisy? Do you think that's ever a reason to walk away from the Lord? It's not a reason to walk away from the Lord, but we should do more to help each other, not be a reason or an excuse that somebody makes. So these are the things that Job goes through: his finances, his family, his flesh, and his friends. And he tells them in chapter 16, verses 1 and 2, I've heard many such things. Miserable comforters are you all. You guys just stink. Now, what is the verdict in the book of Job? Was Satan right? When Satan told God, let me mess up Job's life and he'll curse you, look what happens in Job 42. We're going to look at a couple passages in Job 42. But at the end of the book, God comes in a whirlwind and he takes Job on a trip to the zoo. Have you thought about the ostrich? Have you thought about behemoth? Have you thought about all these animals that I feed and I take care of? And Job, you thought that you could question me and think that you knew how to run the universe? You never cursed me, but you did challenge me too much, and that's the mistake that you made. You didn't curse me to my face, but you thought you knew better than me at times. And that was the challenge. And so remember the question, will Job serve God for nothing? Look at Job 42, verses 5 and 6. I heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. Therefore I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. Now, we're about to read how everything that Job had gets doubled. But I want to point out here that Job repents in dust and ashes. In dust and ashes. Underline that in your Bible if you're into underlining things. He doesn't repent in having everything doubled back to him. Job, will you serve God when everything's stripped away? Well, I never cursed you. I challenged God a little bit, and I repent even of having done that in dust and ashes. Because I've seen your glory. What Job did not need is an answer to why all the suffering happened, but he needed to see God. Do you remember in James chapter 5, verse 11, the text that we began with, that you've seen the mercy of God in the book of Job? You've seen the purpose of the Lord, that he's merciful and compassionate. I'll tell you, the first time I ever read Job, God's mercy is not the thing that flew off the page to me. In fact, when my mom and dad, in order to feel more legitimate in their unbelief, they read through the whole Bible. And the book that they got the most offended with was Deuteronomy and Job. And when they were reading through the book of Job, we had some pretty hard conversations. Because it looks like God is just letting Job be like a play doll to Satan, do whatever you want with him. But James 5:11 says, when you read the book of Job, you need to see the mercy of God. How do you see the mercy of God in the book of Job as he went through all of this and never cursed him? Remember if we started in James chapter 5 where he talked about steadfastness, James chapter 1, verses 3 and 4, talk about how you have to let steadfastness have its full effect. The book begins and ends with steadfastness. Let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be, do you remember what it says? Perfect, complete, lacking nothing. That's James's way of saying that you're going to be a mature Christian. How many of you want to be perfect, complete, lacking nothing? I want that. But what's the path by which it happens is through suffering. All right, so have you ever lifted weights before? You ever had that time where you went to the gym for your first time because your friend wouldn't stop bugging you about it, and then you finally went? And you're like, okay, Wyatt, so here's what I do. I start lifting these weights, and this is supposed to make me stronger. And he goes, yeah, man. And so I start lifting, and I go 1, 2, 3, 4, all that. And by 7 or 8, I'm feeling weaker. But yet you're telling me this is making me stronger. And he goes, that's right. Only if you remain steadfast. Only if you keep it up. The sensation of working out is that you feel like you're getting weaker, but if you keep doing it and you don't give up, that sensation leads to greater strength. Anybody here suffering in their faith? Anybody here feel like they're going through a lot of hardships and you feel like your faith is getting weaker, but you haven't given up? Do you know what's going to happen on the other side of it all? Is you're going to be stronger than you were before. Is that God's mercy? That he can allow trials and suffering to make you into somebody that suffering and trials, that you never went through those, would teach you. I think that's one way that we see the mercy of God. But there's one final thing. Look at Job 42, verses 12 and 13. And the Lord blessed the latter days of Job more than his beginning. And he had 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 female donkeys. He also had 7 sons and 3 daughters. Did you notice what gets doubled here and what doesn't get doubled? Animals get doubled. The children don't get doubled. All right, he had 10 children at the beginning of the book. Why not give him 20 children at the end of the book? And maybe somebody would say, well, Job's already been through enough suffering. Can you imagine 20 kids? Why? But here, this is one of those questions people have had about this book. Why don't you double the children, but you double the animals? Here's my stab at it. The first set of animals, are they dead and gone forever? Yes, so let's double them on earth. The first 10 children that died, are they gone forever? No. The children were doubled. They died, but they have spirits that will last forever. Job does have 20 kids in the afterlife. And this is one of those dim pictures in the book of Job where Job has moments where he doesn't even really believe that there's a conscious afterlife. He doesn't have a clear picture of this. And then the end of the book shows this little hint that there is an afterlife, that this life is not all that there is. Now, one of my best friends, when he lived in San Diego, his wife was cheating on him. And they lived together while she was cheating on him for 2 years. And he kept pleading and begging her to stop seeing this man. And she would not do it. And so he would get on his motorcycle and he would ride out on the San Diego roads and he would say to God, God, I'm not suicidal. But if you could be merciful to me, please send a semi-truck to hit me. Please make this end. And he would get on his motorcycle and he would start telling himself, there's a Job 42, there's a Job 42, there's a Job 42, there's a Job 42. And what he did not mean by that is that in this life, everything's going to be reversed. He looked at this text as there's going to be a day where everything's going to be more than taken care of. Do you know that there's a Job 42? For everybody who loves God, for everybody who remains steadfast, there's a Job 42. May not happen in this life, but you got this one hint of the afterlife in this section. And that's ultimately what our Job 42 is. Do you think it's God's mercy that Job could have everything doubled back with a more matured perspective? And here's everything for you, Job. And now you know how to steward this even better than you did before. Everything that Job went through looks forward to Jesus. Jesus had no finances. He had nowhere to lay his head at night. His family thought that he was out of his mind. Most of his friends forsook him in his most trying moment. And his flesh was torn to pieces when he was on the cross. And I think Job, through the eyes of faith, looked forward to the coming of Christ when he says in chapter 19, verse 25, I know that my Redeemer lives, and at last he will stand upon the earth. One final thing. Let me ask this question. Who knows more about God? Job in the days of Job, or you sitting here right now? Who knows more about God? You do. I do. Because we have the full plan of salvation. We've got the coming of Christ. Job, with his narrow view of who God was, clung to him. Will us, who have a wider lens on who he is and what he's done and what he's pledged himself to do, remain firm? The steadfastness of Job. Don't give up, and you'll be made stronger through it. We're about to sing a song of invitation, and this song is intended to encourage us. I've been so encouraged by your guys' attentiveness in less than ideal circumstances. I can tell that you guys are very engaged with the scripture and care about learning that, and that's an encouragement to me. This song, though, is intended to encourage all of us. If there's anybody here tonight that needs to get their life right with God, maybe you've not become a Christian. Don't leave here without talking to somebody about that. Don't leave here without talking to somebody about getting your life right with God while we stand and while we sing the song that's been selected.